Scribbly Gum presents The Seaside Witch, Episode 1. Have you ever had one of those experiences that make you think that just maybe there are some very fundamental things that we don't understand about the universe? I had one of those today. I was late for work because my boyfriend had insisted that I go to the post office and collect his parcel. So I was pretty flustered and had my foot on the gas more than I usually would. I was just about to scream around a corner in my car when a little voice in my head shouted, "Slow down!" I braked immediately, just before a small grey wallaby bounced out onto the road. I missed the animal by less than a centimetre. A millisecond of hesitation and I would have slammed into it. I was too shocked to even swear. The animal looked at me with a strange expression in its big dark eyes, as if it was memorising the lines of my face, and then a car behind me honked their horn, and calm as you like, the wallaby turned and hopped off into the suburban streets. What on earth a wallaby was doing in the middle of the city during the morning rush hour was beyond me, but I'm so glad I braked. Someone must have been looking out for me, or the wallaby. Someone or something. But that's silly, isn't it? It was probably just dumb luck. By the time I got to work, though, it felt like something important had shifted in the world. Or at least, in my world. Everyone else seemed normal, talking about their weekends or their kids' school play. One or two of them were murmuring about the performance review the next day and whether pay rises were likely this year. I settled in and tried to focus on my emails, but my mind kept wandering back to the strange look on that wallaby's face. It hadn't been startled or panicked, which was strange for a wild animal in the middle of a busy city that had very nearly been flattened by a car. Then the day got busy, and the image of the wallaby flitted out of my mind. It wasn't until I was driving home that I had time to think about it again. I hoped that it had found somewhere peaceful to graze. Maybe it was lonely because all its friends had moved away. That was a feeling I could relate to. I'm not exactly sure when it happened, but one by one, all my friends had disappeared. They'd got married or left for an overseas job or were buried deep in the suburbs and starting families. I felt like the lone survivor of the old gang, the only one still living in the city. I gripped the steering wheel at the thought, although my eyes scanned the road for any rogue wallabies. On paper, my life looked great. I lived in a trendy suburb with my boyfriend of 2 years and worked in a job most journalists wished they had. I'd been a bit of a late bloomer, but at 32, I was doing okay. By the time I got home, I was exhausted. I just wanted to sink into the soft folds of the couch, put on some mind-numbing TV, and for a few hours pretend I didn't exist. My boyfriend was already sprawled out on the couch, and the apartment was filled with the sickly sweet smell of his vape and the bang, bang, bang of his latest violent computer game. He didn't look up when I sat next to him, just grunted a greeting and continued playing his game. I considered telling him about the wallaby I nearly hit, about the feeling that someone was watching over me. But when I looked at his slouched shoulders and glassy eyes, fixated on the technicoloured screen, the words evaporated. I could talk, but I couldn't make him listen. Instead, I went to the kitchen, boiled the kettle and made tea. With a fresh pot, I was about to sit down and watch something on my laptop when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I immediately went to reject the call, but somehow my finger must have grazed the accept call button. Annoyed, I lifted the phone up to my ear. "Astrid, hello!" I instantly recognised the slightly floral tones of my Great Aunt Valerie, and for the first time that day I managed to smile. I liked Great Aunt Valerie. I always felt she was looking out for me, taking a keen interest in my education, my accomplishments, my career. It's rare to find these days, with all the smartphones and social media, but Great Aunt Valerie was someone who really listened. She didn't just sit there and nod. She listened, and she cared. It was funny because I couldn't even remember if she was on my mother or my father's side. I didn't know her surname, or whether she'd ever been married, but I did know that the summers we spent in the sleepy seaside town of Rosewood Bay when I was a child were some of the best memories of my life. I used to love riffling through the endless items in her antique store. Antique might not be quite the right word for it. It was more of an endless assortment of knickknacks. Everything from teapots to wooden statuettes of cats, and a whole section for the gentle crafts like sewing, knitting, embroidery and weaving. My parents would spend most of the time working or sleeping, but Great Aunt Valerie would often close the shop and take me for a walk in the forest or down along the beach, and we'd pick up interesting driftwood or collect cicada shells. Great Aunt Valerie had never talked to me as if I was a silly child, even when I was really young. She had always considered my questions and answered me thoughtfully, as if she was learning just as much from the question as I was from the answer. I'd been meaning to visit my Great Aunt Valerie for years now, but my boyfriend didn't like visiting my family. If I insisted that we go, he just complained the entire time, and then I ended up wishing I'd stayed at home. But she still called me every 6 months or so to see how I was, to tell me that she missed me, and to ask if I'd like to take a 6-month sabbatical from my stressful job, move to Rosewood Bay, and take over her antique shop. So when I answered her call, I was smiling, but already preparing to gently tell her I couldn't just leave my boyfriend and my apartment and my job and just go and live in some seaside town. "How was your day, dear?" she asked. Her voice was cheerful and caring, and without meaning to, I found the story of the near miss come tumbling out. Great Aunt Valerie listened carefully and made some comforting noises. When I was finished, she paused for a long moment before saying, "Always listen to your intuition, Astrid. It's a powerful thing." Then I asked about the goings-on in Rosewood Bay, and she asked about the latest antics of my slightly insane colleagues, and we had the usual back and forth about the shop, and I playfully brushed off her offers to take it over. But I promised to visit in the next few months if work calmed down a bit. "I think you'll be visiting sooner than you might think," was the last thing she said as she rang off. The call left me feeling lighter, and after slicing myself an apple, I decided to take my tea upstairs, curl up in bed, and read one of the 16 books that were currently occupying my nightstand. The next day was miserable. Rain beat down on the window panes, my hair went frizzy in the humidity, and there was just nothing good to take in for lunch at work. Traffic was a nightmare, with commuters racing across the sodden streets without looking where they were going. Today was my performance review day, and I spent the drive to work rehearsing what I was going to say to my boss. My contributions to the team, the tasks that I had handled with confidence and care. I imagined the moment she smiled at me and offered me both a significant pay increase and the producer role on the new radio show. I'd been working hard for years to get to that position, slowly moving my way up through the organisation. There was no parking on the street, so I had to drive around for ages and then walk 3 blocks in the pouring rain. Even with my umbrella, I arrived at the building looking somewhat worse for wear. The day passed uneventfully until 3 p.m. came around and my boss called me into the conference room. My face was plastered with a slightly nervous smile, and I sat down and forced my knee to remain still. "Astrid, thank you for meeting with me." I was about to begin my self-praise spiel when my boss frowned. "Astrid, we are very happy with your work, but unfortunately there have been budget cuts and we can't keep you on." She kept talking for a long time, praising my work or complaining about the industry as a whole. She promised to write me introductory emails to other organisations so I wouldn't be left in the lurch. I just sat there, stunned, my ears ringing, my eyes glazed. I wanted to cry, or shout, or throw something, but instead I calmly thanked her when she finished talking. She told me to take the rest of the afternoon off. I thanked her again, and then grabbed my bag and left. I sat in my car crying for a good half an hour. I tried calling my boyfriend, but got no response. So I started the engine, put on my driving glasses, took a few deep breaths, and headed for home. My boyfriend was in the kitchen when I opened the door to the apartment. He looked up. "Oh, good. You're home. We need to talk." He didn't notice my swollen eyes or the grim set of my mouth. Sighing, I went and sat on the couch. "So, remember how I told you I applied for a job in London a while back? Well, I got it. The job starts in a week. It's really short notice because the other reporter had some sort of medical issue." My mouth fell open. "Anyway, I don't do long distance. It's never been my thing, so do you want to take on the lease or—" He trailed off and looked at me awkwardly. I stared at him. "You're breaking up with me? Like this? After 2 years?" My voice was thin and reedy. He shuffled his feet a bit. "Yeah, like I said, I don't do long distance." He slept on the couch that night, and I crawled into bed feeling like some creature that had been repeatedly run over by a truck. I cried. I felt so rejected. By my work, by my boyfriend, my ex-boyfriend. And the situation just kept getting more grim. I couldn't afford to rent the apartment on my own, especially without a job. That meant the awful prospect of looking for an affordable share house with tolerable housemates. In one day my life had unravelled. Finally, exhausted, I fell asleep on my sodden pillow. I dreamed of the shop, the one nestled on a quiet little street in Rosewood Bay. I dreamed of the slightly battered furniture and the jingle of the bell on the front door, of the flaking wooden sign out the front that read, "The Bay Collectibles and Treasures." When I woke, my eyes were puffy and I felt like hell warmed up, but I knew what I was going to do. It was 6 a.m, but I knew she'd be awake, sitting out on her porch with a steaming cup of tea, petting her cat Penelope, and staring out at the ocean. 10 minutes later, everything was arranged. I had 2 weeks to pack up the apartment and finish up at work, and then I'd bundle all of my worldly possessions in the car and head north, to the sleepy little town of Rosewood Bay. I would take over the store for 6 months, while I searched for jobs and sorted out my life, and Great Aunt Valerie would finally get her wish and depart on a round-the-world cruise. The next fortnight passed in a blur. My ex-boyfriend left, taking all his things with him. I sold as many of the other items as I could online and gave the rest away until I could just about squeeze everything into my car. I finished up at work and was relieved to hand in my security badge and walk out the door for the last time. That night, I slept on the floor. In the morning, I handed in my keys, collected my deposit, and headed north. The drive was pleasant. The weather had cleared and the wattles were in full bloom, lining the highway in a glorious golden haze. Traffic was light, and I made good time, stopping once to buy a hot pie and a cup of tea from a small cafe. As the car rounded a bend and the ocean came into view, I wondered if Great Aunt Valerie had somehow guessed how tired I had grown of the city, of the concrete footpaths and light pollution, of the glassy-eyed commuters and the grim grey skyscrapers. I was glad to have left all of that behind me. I was only half an hour out of Rosewood Bay and squinting against the glare of the sun. The coastline made me catch my breath with its wild, wind-blown beauty. There were a lot more houses than I remembered. The trees were short and bent by the ceaseless buffeting of the wind. The headlands loomed over the sparkling water and cast their shadows over the jagged rocks below. When I spied the sand, it stretched into the distance, a light golden streak sandwiched between the dark green line of the forest and the ever-changing line of the water. I took a deep breath in and smelt burning. I looked around to see if there was any smoke on the horizon, but it was a clear, cloudless day. Then I noticed the thick, billowing smoke coming from the engine. I pulled over, cursing a bit under my breath. I'd left the last hamlet behind 5 minutes or so ago and was forced to park on the shoulder. I popped the bonnet and opened it up, jumping back to avoid the sudden cloud of hot, toxic smoke. Come on, girl, don't let me down now. I patted the side of the car, hoping against hope that there wasn't anything seriously wrong with her. I knew a little bit about cars. I'd changed the oil every year and had changed the coolant once as well. I'd even had a go at replacing the brake pads, although that had been with the help of a friend. So I started with what I knew. I checked the oil, which was a bit low, and topped it up. Then I had a look at the coolant and realised I must have left the cap off when I topped it up that morning. It was very low. Unfortunately, all I had in the car in the way of liquids was peppermint tea, which I'm pretty sure was a few degrees too separated from distilled water. I needed half a litre of water, and I had a litre of tea. I checked my phone, wondering who I might be able to call, when I heard the rumble of an engine. I looked up. Crawling slowly down the road was a shiny green tractor with its bucket high in the air. I waited as it slowly came closer and then tried to wave it down. It pulled over behind me, and a woman with greying sandy hair jumped down. "You'll be Valerie's great niece, then." She said it as a phrase, not a question, with such utter certainty that all I could manage was to nod. "Astrid, if I recall." Again I nodded, wondering how on earth this random farmer knew my name. "I had an inkling you might come this way. You need some water, right?" At this, my mouth fell open, and I quickly snapped it shut. "Yes, my car overheated," I said. "Thank you, Mrs." She reached back into the tractor and grabbed a large bottle of distilled water. Then she handed it to me. "Annabelle Cherry. Just call me Annabelle." She was short and plump with crinkles around her eyes and mouth as if she smiled a lot. She was wearing a pair of bright blue overalls and some Wellington boots, and she was holding out her hand. I quickly reached out and shook it. "It's nice to meet you, Annabelle. Thank you for the water." "Are you fine to pop it in?" I nodded. "Grand. Then I'll be on my way. There's a cow I need to pull out of the bog in the north paddock. Silly blighter. It's the 3rd time this week. I'll pop into the shop sometime soon, though. I've got Penelope." I stared at her blankly for a moment, quavering a little under the intensity of Annabelle's stare. "Oh, the cat?" "Yeah. She's very eager to leave the country and return to the bustling metropolis. She's not a country cat, I'm afraid." In the chaos of the last fortnight, I had completely forgotten about the cat. Great Aunt Valerie had apologised that she wouldn't be there to greet me, as the cruise was departing a few days before I arrived. She had promised to leave me some information and instructions on running the shop, though. It wasn't ideal, but I wasn't really in a strong position to negotiate, so I had agreed to whatever she said. Great Aunt Valerie must have left Penelope with this Annabel lady. I thanked her again for the water, and she sprung nimbly back into the cab of the tractor, waved at me, and then continued up the road. I topped up the coolant, wondering how on earth Annabel knew where I would be, and what I would need. The water did the trick, and I was off, although I made a mental note to take the car to the mechanic sooner rather than later. I was just on the outskirts of town, swinging around a large roundabout, when a large grey four-wheel drive turned onto the road behind me. It came very, very close to my tailgate, and I glared in the rear vision mirror at the driver. I was going the speed limit, or maybe a few kilometres under, but there was really no need for anyone to ever drive that close to another car. The road was clear. There was every opportunity to pass, but for some reason the driver stayed there, right on my tail, the hulking grey truck looming over my little town car. I looked for somewhere to pull over, to force them to pass me, but then I thought better of it. What if they pulled over as well? I focused on the road and tried to remember the way into town. Great Aunt Valerie had a cosy little apartment above the shop, and the back balcony had a view over the water. I couldn't wait to settle in and make myself a fresh cup of tea. I always forgot just how exhausting driving could be. I glanced in the rear vision mirror again, and the four-wheel drive looked like it was centimetres away from a collision. I didn't know what to do. My throat was tight, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. What the hell was this idiot doing? Then suddenly they were gone. I didn't see where the car went. There were no turn-offs or places to pull over. 1 second the truck was about to hit me. The next, it had disappeared. I glanced in my rear vision mirror, but there was only empty road. Had I imagined it? I shook myself then and was relieved to see a street that looked familiar. And then there was the shop. It looked just as I remembered it, right down to the flaky paint. I parked right out the front and got out. My whole body felt stiff from the drive, and I stretched in the warm sunshine for a moment before I went to look for the pot plant that Great Aunt Valerie had left the key under. I searched under every pot plant I could find, but there was no key under any of them. I needed to use the bathroom, so I tried calling Great Aunt Valerie, but there was no response. Her voice went straight to voicemail, which meant she was likely already on her cruise. She must have forgotten. I knew the door was locked. But I tried it anyway, and it creaked open as the little bell jingled. There on the counter, in Great Aunt Valerie's neat handwriting, was a note. I lifted it to my nose, and it smelt faintly of jasmine and lemon balm. Astrid, thank you for looking after the store and Penelope. The keys are in the 5th drawer down. I've left some milk in the fridge so you can make tea. Be well, and don't pay any mind to aggressive drivers in grey four-wheel drives. Much love, Great Aunt Valerie. I stared at the note. How on earth did she know about the aggressive driver? I looked around, just to be sure I was alone. There was no one else there. The shop was empty, except for the gently swirling dust motes that glinted in the afternoon sun. But I was too hungry and thirsty and in need of the bathroom to ponder for long. I went up to the flat, filled the kettle and put it on, then relieved myself and headed back down to unpack a few things from the car. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity. I didn't rest until all my belongings were neatly stowed away in cupboards and drawers, and I had reacquainted myself with the various kitchen items. Only then did I sink into the couch and close my eyes for a moment. I must have drifted into sleep, because when I awoke, my stomach was rumbling and it was dark outside. I searched the kitchen and found some cereal in the pantry. I sleepily ate and then decamped up to the room, where I donned my pajamas, brushed my teeth, and collapsed onto the bed. My final thought, as I passed into the world of dreams, was, "I've done it.